Landlords in New York City were shocked and surprised when the U.S. Supreme Court decided to decline hearing their case against rent control. But I'm not. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the case of the New York City landlords against rent control. Now, this case could have had implications across the entire country because it might have found that rent control itself is illegal, it's unconstitutional. It's what I believe personally, but the Supreme Court decided not to hear it. And that's a bad thing. I mean, honest truth is that this sort of thing, in my opinion, is an unconstitutional taking of private property for public use without just compensation. Basically, what they're doing is they're turning landlords into low income housing providers. They're using us as social service providers because the city itself doesn't want to provide that service to the citizens. So they want to put that on the back of landlords, of private business owners, and that's wrong. Okay, us subsidizing those tenants' rents and preventing us from being able to even pay our bills in some cases because we can't receive enough rental income, well, that's going to lead to very, very bad outcomes. And it really becomes a form of indentured servitude. So, it makes no sense to me whatsoever, especially when they throw in the fact that, hey, you can't evict these people, you can't get rid of these people. These people, they can pass down rights to your units to their children, their grandchildren, and on and on. Basically, these rent control rules, they are illegal and they should be abolished, in my opinion. The Supreme Court needed to hear this case. I know it's not the only case that they have pending right now, but it was one of the best chances that landlords, specifically in New York City, had at getting rid of the 2019 rent stabilization law that has basically destroyed them. Okay, so what are we going to see now that the Supreme Court has decided not to hear this case? We're going to see more of the same. And when I say more of the same, that means that we're going to see more landlords who are just facing financial ruin. We're going to see more properties that are falling into disrepair because landlords are unable to raise the rent in order to keep up with maintenance, to keep up with capital expenditures. We're going to see more tragedies where tenants, they pass away because of problems with maintenance, problems with fixing things that should have been repaired. Okay, we're going to see a lot of landlords getting completely out of the rental business. What does that mean? That means converting units over to condos, converting units over to co-ops, or just finding some other use for them. We're going to see more warehousing of units because it would cost too much and they would never be able to recuperate the losses if they were to actually repair these units. So we're going to see more units being warehoused. Basically, we're going to see more of the same stuff that's been happening for years on end. And meanwhile, the tenant rights groups and the politicians, they don't understand why the number of rent-controlled units is decreasing. They don't understand why housing is somehow, even with rent control policies in place, becoming less affordable. Because they're too dumb to realize that the laws and the rules that they put in place, that they support, they are the cause of all of these issues. Okay? They are the pure cause, and that these rent control policies, these anti-landlord laws, okay, will be the end of them. And it will drive the middle class in particular, and eventually the lower income people as well, just straight out of the city. And the wealthy people, they're not going to stick around if there's nothing there for them to do, okay, if there's no other people there. So this will lead to the decline of the city. And I like New York, okay? That's the truth. I know a lot of people, they talk a lot of mess about New York, right? But every time I visited there, I've had a great time. And I just, I think the place it's an amazing city, amazing, beautiful place. It needs to be cleaned up. The crime problems need to be taken care of. The anti-business establishment needs to be destroyed. But, if we can get these things fixed, I mean, we're talking about just a place that would be absolutely great for the people who live there, for the people who visit there, the people who do business there. Okay. And that's all I want. I mean, the U.S. is a great country and we need a great city to be our economic center. And New York is the place, but it will not ever be that place forever. I mean, it can't be that place forever if we just keep going down this negative socialist path where they think that, hey, everything should be for free, and everything is anti-business. I mean, that's just dumb. It's just dumb, and I just don't agree with it. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So what do you think of this Supreme Court decision not to even hear this rent stabilization case? Okay, are you surprised by it? Are you disappointed by it? I've had a lot of tenants in my comments section lately just ragging on me because they're like, oh well, you landlords are just getting what you deserve. Well, just remember that this is going to hurt tenants as well. You might not realize it, you might not understand economics, but it will end up hurting you. And my suggestion to you as a tenant, if you're watching this right now and you want to cuss me out or whatever, right, is to look up the economic effects of rent control long term. Don't think about short term. Short term, yeah, your rents aren't rising. Long term, though, it just causes the entire system to collapse, the entire housing system. So you're only hurting yourself. You're hurting people who want to move to New York. You're hurting everyone. Okay, so anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from therealdeal.com, and it says, Supreme Court didn't save landlords. Now what? Owners of rent stabilized buildings crushed by High Court's rejection. Yeah, and this was one of their last chances of being able to get rid of these laws and maybe be able to turn around, just years of losses at this point. But anyway, let's get into the article and see what it says. When the Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear a challenge to New York's rent stabilization law, the case that struggling landlords saw as the best shot at salvation ended with a whimper. The landlord groups behind the suit hoped the High Court would strike down New York rent stabilization, forcing a reworking of the law. Instead, they did not even get an explanation for the rejection. Their case simply didn't make the cut. It's like when you go out for varsity and you go to the list and it's like, oh, you're not there, said Jay Martin, who heads the Community Housing Improvement Program, one of the groups that sued. The Rent Stabilization Association was another. Now, the first time I covered this, I said what I thought, which was that the Supreme Court was not even going to look at it. They were probably going to, kick the decision back to the lower court, which already rejected the case, right? Meaning that the landlords were going to essentially lose. Okay, that was my personal opinion. I said there's a small sliver of a chance that they'll actually look at it, but the odds were stacked against landlords from the very beginning. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because here we are, we've been in a system where rent control has been in place for darn near 100 years, right? And we need to get rid of it. We need to just get rid of it and move back to the system where the market dictates what the rents are going to be. And I just don't see that happening. I was afraid that if the Supreme Court, even if they did take a look at it, they might allow rent control to stand because of such a long precedent of it existing. Okay, so I don't think that the outcome that these landlords were looking for was going to happen. But you know what? Sometimes we're not. There's no chance for us to win. So, I always look things through with an individual perspective, okay? As an individual landlord. You can't look through, oh, we're going to change the policies or we're going to change the laws in this place where they hate us. Because that is a very, very difficult thing to do in so many cases, right? Instead, you go to a place where the laws aren't working against you, where the government is not working against you, and then you invest there. Okay, I mean, there's nothing saying that you can't do that. If you live in a place, right? For example, let's say that you live in a place, and in this place, they say that all landlords must give 100% of their income to the government. Well, why would you live in that place? I mean, I wouldn't. I would just say, well, I'm just going to move somewhere where I don't have to give 100% of my income to the government. Well, that's what this rent control is doing. It's basically saying, hey, you have to give away all of your income to the tenants, right? Basically, the tenants get all the benefits of the cheap rent. They get to live for below market rates, and you have to subsidize their living for as long as they choose to live there. And I don't want to do that. I don't think any landlord wants to do that. Now, some landlords, they've worked the numbers out and they're like, okay, well, I'll be able to make so much in appreciation and blah, 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 blah. And therefore, this will work, right? And a lot of landlords, they did the math, and then guess what they did? They changed the laws and made it more difficult for landlords to be able to make that math work. And the result was landlords ended up in bankruptcy, landlords ended up in financial ruin. And that could very well happen to a lot of landlords right now who are just barely scraping by. Well, 5 years from now, those landlords that are barely scraping by, they're going to be done. Their savings will be gone, etc. If they're not giving properties back to the bank, then they're going to let those properties basically fall apart because they've got nothing left. And that's the end result of all of this. It's not, even if, let's say the tenant wins and the landlord ends up bankrupt, right? Do you really win? Because the building you're living in is falling apart. It hasn't been updated in 30 years. You've got green carpet on the floor, or you've got a toilet seat on your toilet from the 1970s. Okay, did you really win? No, you didn't win. You lost. You lost bad because you gave up on having actual, modern, up to date, well maintained housing because you wanted to have cheap rent. Now you're living in a place that is dilapidated and falling apart. So yeah, I feel for the landlords. I hope that something happens. Something has got to happen to be able to really change these sort of laws. But my recommendation is it will never change. It will always be go where you're treated best. Listen to the guy, the nomad capitalist, right? Now he's always talking about leaving the country. Talking about going to a country where they treat you better, right? Well, I believe that, hey, there's a lot of us who can't leave the country. I'm not in the type of position where I can just move to another country and be able to survive. Okay, I'm not a digital nomad. Okay, I have a real job. I own real properties here. I own a real business here in the U.S. that has, where I have to stay here. I have family here, etc. A lot of connections. But that doesn't mean that I have to stay in a state where I get treated like garbage. That doesn't mean that I have to, even if you do stay in a state where you might pay a personal property taxes or a personal income tax that's higher, you might want to invest out of state where your investments are able to, just operate without losing just tons of money due to local laws and regulations like rent control.